Good morning, everyone. I'm going to, I have never seen this podium on this stage before. It's kind of massive and maybe brings us back to like a few decades ago. So I'm going to just stand up here. If anyone cannot hear me, let me know and I'll stand behind the microphone. Does this work okay so far, projecting? Yes. All right, that sounds good. All right, so here we are. I know talking about college and the college process is not an entirely new thing for you, but you and your kids will be delving more deeply into that now for the next year and a half. I know I'm excited about it for them and for you and energized about it, but I know that's where I come from. I'm actually curious, what are some of the thoughts or perhaps emotions going on in your mind? Think about a word or two that describes how you anticipate this process will be for you. Sure. Oh no, wait. There was this plethora of, I heard terrifying and stressful. What are the words? Sorry, go ahead. Exciting. I love it. Exciting. Confusing. Tiring. Okay. So it seems like there's a little bit of a theme. That this process or the prospect of this process may feel daunting for you and certainly for your kids. It's not a small part of what Lou and his team and all of us will continue to do for you is to make sure that we demystify, that we make sure that we raise the temperature at the right time and lower the temperature in all the other times. These guys and our guests are the great content experts, so I don't want to take a whole lot of time this morning, but I want to offer just a few pieces of advice. First thing is, your kids will reflect back, if not amplify, your mood, your anxieties, your stress, your joy, and your enthusiasm. So while it's completely okay for all of you to feel what you feel, and we tell that to our students, be really mindful. Clearly this is going to be challenging and stressful for them, but it also can be joyful and exciting, and they will reflect back what they see from you. So whether it's the people you rely on in your lives to help manage your stress and anxieties, make sure you take advantage of those opportunities because we don't necessarily want to impose those on our kids and all of your kids in ways that are less productive. This can be, I'm not a father of someone who's applying to college just yet in my life, but this can be a joyful and exciting process of discovery for your kids and for you. An actual time for you to connect more closely with them, for them to sort of figure out even more of the things they're looking for and to find those things. And if I can reassure you on one thing, they will find where they're going to go and where they're going to do well and where they're meant to be. That will absolutely happen. One of the ways I know that, and one of the ways that Lou and his team know that, is that we do it every single year, and we do it really well, and our students get to the places that they are meant to go to. It is going to happen. I'm not going to tell you, like, sometimes people say, it's going to be okay. Well, it is going to be okay, but I also know all of you and all of us, it needs to be better than just okay. We want them to go to the places that make the most sense for them. And along the way, we don't want them to be burned out and stressed out and feeling like the whole world rests upon whether a single admissions committee in a single school decides whether they are worthy or not. That's not what this is about. You brought them to the school, they came to the school to help get a better sense of who they are, what they're going to be able to achieve, get them prepared for the next steps in their lives, and be able to get to a wonderful school, college or university, that's going to help them figure that out. That is going to happen. I cannot guarantee you it's going to be any one of 7 to 10 colleges. But to be honest, when I go through the admission process for students coming to Blair, some of you may have heard this, I remind people there are more than 7 to 10 colleges in the whole world. There really are. The good news is, for those who are thinking about those 7 to 10 or 15 colleges, we have had a lot of success there too. And if ultimately, as you go through the process with Lou and with his team, and your kids say, I want to look at a range of schools, including those 7 to 10, we're going to do everything possible to make sure that they have the best platform upon which to have a case be made to those schools. But again, remember, this is not about just those 7 to 10. It's about your kids getting to a great place that's going to be best for them to help develop the people they're going to become. A couple other pieces of quick advice. In terms of figuring out your place in this, there's no perfect rule book or playbook. Every kid and every family is different. So I would caution you not to disengage from the process too much. Partly, I think, because when people say, I'm a little concerned, I'm mystified, uninformed, you want to stay informed and stay engaged and involved. So that's part of the reason why Lou and his team are so good at what they do. They will help keep you engaged and involved. Ask lots of questions. They are the content experts. There are a lot of expertise around this school, but it's not necessarily going to be your son or daughter's English teacher who's going to be the expert on college. So one of the things I do ask you to do is that if there are things on your minds, things on your kids' minds, go to the people who know their work best. So don't be disengaged by it. On the flip side, this is actually a really unique and wonderful opportunity to give your kids a chance to develop some more agency and autonomy and sense of ownership of the process. There are some people who get, to be honest, maybe you've heard of this, a little bit too intrusive in the college process for their kids. You might think there's no such thing as that, sometimes there is. And so we want them to actually get a sense of ownership of where do they want to go to school, what kind of things do they want to be and accomplish and be involved with. Again, this is not college placement, this is college counseling. And so Lou and his team will spend a lot of time, mostly with your kids, but also with you, really thinking that through and counseling you in the directions that make the most sense. So I'm hoping there will always be moments, right? There will always be moments where it doesn't feel as calm and relaxed as I'm trying to portray maybe it can be. There will be stressful moments and difficult moments. We do this work together, and we will get to a point when, and it'll be here before you know, before your son and daughter graduates, we're really excited to say, like, yes, there's a range of options for them, and I think this is going to make a whole lot of sense, and they're going to do wonderfully. And what's been wonderful in the last few months, I've had more students come back over the breaks who just started college than I've seen in the last few years, and I love getting the anecdotal feedback of, first of all, I miss Blair, which is always nice to hear. I miss all of the things that this community has had to offer, but I was ready, and I felt ready, and I felt prepared. And that connection of Blair helps continue to ground me as I move forward in colleges and universities in the future. So those are the things that are going to happen. You will be well taken care of. Always let us know if you're concerned that things are not going the way you want them to. And we will be I think Lou and his team are always very good at making sure that we support all of you, sometimes talk people off the ledge a little bit too, make sure that we focus on the great work that's going to happen. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to people who very much know what they're doing and enjoy today.
One of the great things about our job is that we have a chance to make connections with the admissions people on the other side of the desk. And many of them are all well-intentioned, and they're all, they're in it for the kids as well as we are. So every now and then we run into some really good ones. And Kate Jacobson from Franklin Marshall is here today to talk. And so to you about, I'm not sure exactly what she's going to talk about, but I'm sure it'll be very pointed and helpful. But she's one of those people that I can pick up the phone and call, and she knows our school really well, and she advocates for our students. And in our business, that's the gold standard. And so we're really happy that she's here today, and she's hopefully going to impart some great advice for you. And then we'll finish up the rest of the morning with some students and your son or daughter's college counselor. But no further ado, Kate Jacobson.
So it's 2018. I have my notes on my phone. I apologize for that in advance. But thank you all for coming. Thank you for having me, for Lou and his team. Blair Academy has been a place over my 7-year career where it's just been really, really a fantastic place because of the relationships I have with the team. And just, I want you to know what a great place it is because of the relationships that they've built with admission people all across all different types of schools. So keep that in mind. I am the Associate Dean of Admission at Franklin and Marshall College, starting year number 8 now, which I'm really excited about. And just some background on me, I was a first-generation college-going student. So my mom and dad, growing up, they said, we want a better life for you than we have, but we have no idea how to help you or how to get you there, so good luck in figuring it out. Somehow I did, thankfully. Was able to get a great undergraduate and master's degree, and here I am still working in the admission world today. And I'm here just to share some advice going through this process. Being junior parents, you've got plenty of time ahead of you. This is a great time to start thinking about the college process. And so I'm here to just give you some tips and some wisdom along the way. The first thing, everyone has to take a deep breath. So I heard some very terrifying words, terrifying, stressful. So everyone take a deep breath because this is a college process that's supposed to be about the journey. And so there are a lot of things to make you nervous and stressed out about, but just know that it's the beginning of the process and I don't want you to feel any of those things. You're in great hands, and so being stressed out and terrified and all of those bad words you said earlier are really, really not necessary. The biggest thing that I should say, first of all, is remember who's going to college. Sounds easy, you know your student is. However, on a daily basis, I get phone calls that go like this. We'd like to come for a tour. We'd like an interview. We'd like to know more about your pre-med programs. And sometimes I'll say to mom or dad calling, oh, are you both applying? Because I'm concerned about who the we is in this situation. Going to college in the process, I've kind of come up with a metaphor, is like going on a journey in a car. Your student needs to be the driver, and you're the co-pilot. Now, granted, I know that it's hard. You want to reach over and grab the wheel every once in a while. However, you really have to let your student be the driver. You're there to help support them and guide them through this process. There are other people in this car, so Lou and his team are also there. They're kind of like the backseat drivers, but well-intentioned and very, very smart about the process. A lot of times with picking the car, it's important that you realize and have conversations going throughout. And so honest conversations with your student is another big tip that I have. Before you even pick the car, if you have a different budget in mind or different set of finances, you need to be honest with your student. So don't let your student test drive a Lamborghini if you have a Honda budget in mind. And I drive a Honda, so I can say that and feel comfortable saying that. The point is, again, with having this car and being in this car together, you really need to have those conversations before you begin the process. And now's a great time to have the finance conversation, talking about what financial aid may or may not break you in this process as far as what choices are on your list. Another piece of information, there are a lot of college experts out there, everywhere. Swim practice, your fitness classes, the person at the deli counter, everyone has a story. Well, I got my son into Harvard 15 years ago, so let me tell you how to do it. Or you go to a book club and you hear someone say, oh, well, my half-brother on my aunt's side knows a guy and he can get you in. There are a lot of phony experts. And really, honestly, the only experts you need are the people working at this office, in the college counseling office. They are the true experts. A lot of people are going to try to steal their spotlight and try to steal your attention, but just remember who the real experts are. Just like we were just talking about, this school has a reputation for getting students in fantastic schools and universities. Another tip, don't fall for the name brand glitz and glamour. A lot of times students fall in love with the school, but they feel like, I don't want to go there because no one knows what it is or where it is. If that's the best place for a student, then that needs to be where the student goes. There's a huge buzzword right now in college process, and that's fit. And I'm really tired of hearing about fit, because I think that sets up the expectation that there's a school for everyone, just like there's a soulmate for everyone. There are 6 billion people, probably more than that on the planet, just like there are more than 7 to 10 colleges and universities on the planet. There are plenty of fits for your student. Also, it's important for you and your student to realize that there is not one perfect, ideal college or university. Every place will have its pros and cons, and it's up to your student to make the most of the experience that they're able to get from that place. A lot of times students feel like they're looking for this fit, and they're trying to find that one perfect place. And they forget that a lot of it really comes down to what the student's going to make out of the experience that they're provided at that institution. So keep that in mind too with the whole fit buzzword right now. You're going to hear that a lot. Sure, you want your student to go to a place that's academically challenging, good social life. You want them to have a long list of things that your student will enjoy. But do keep in mind at the end of the day that it's your responsibility to help your student understand that at the end of it, it really needs to be about what they're going to do. They need to go outside of their dorm room. They need to make the most of their college experience, whatever and wherever that may be. Another big thing that I get a lot, this happens on airplanes all the time. I always sit down next to someone and they'll say, so what do you do? And I know as soon as I say that I work in college admission, I'm going to hear a whole bunch of just random, terrible things that aren't true, and that always happens. And one of the things I always hear and people ask me is, so what does it take? What's the magic formula? What will it take for my student to get into X school? Not even Franklin and Marshall. They want to know how I can help them get into a school that I've never worked for or been to. And that's another thing to keep in mind. There's not one magic formula. It's not this many APs or honors or IB classes plus this many extracurriculars plus this many leadership roles and activities equals an acceptance. That's not the way the process works. And why I know that is because there are thousands of people that have the same job that I do. Surprise, spoiler alert, I'm a human being and not a robot, because if it was a formula, I would be out of a job because it would just be easy to plug in what your student's taking and figure out if they were getting in or not. And it is a very human process. We have applications that ask a lot of questions about your students so we can learn more about them and who they are as a human being. And so a lot of times I think parents and students forget that too. It's about who they are as a person. We're looking at all the puzzle pieces that your students bring. It's not just your GPA and your test score. Because when they're walking around our campus, it's not that we're just asking them, what's your GPA, what was your test score? When we bring them to our campuses, we want them to contribute in many different ways in their strengths and to push them to make their weaknesses stronger as well. A lot of times families will say, here's what we have, here's what my student has. Will they get in? And I have no idea, honestly. I can tell you what our admitted student profile looked like the year before, but I never know what's coming down the pike. So I never know what our application pool looks like until we start reading those applications. Another thing that people on airplanes always ask me is, how long do you actually read the applications? Do you even read them? And I'm here to tell you that I definitely read them. At Franklin and Marshall, every application gets read front to back by 2 different people at 2 different times. Typically takes between 12 and 17 minutes per application. Now I know that your students will spend much longer on that, writing them and creating them, and that's great, and they need to take as long as it takes them to write them. But just know that there are, again, humans on the other end of the process that spend a lot of time reading and analyzing the applications that they do send, which is even more important for you to spend time with your student and the college counseling office in making sure that their application is the best sense of themselves that they can give. A lot of times students will say, I spent a lot of time writing my essay because I heard that my essay is supposed to be funny. It's not the time to start being funny. If you're not a comedian, don't try and write your college essay. That's not the first place to do that. We really just want a true sense of your student's self to come through on the application. It's not easy to do, but it's definitely something that's doable, and it's a great challenge to set them up for the college process. There is one magic formula that I do want to share, and that is just the numbers of experience that your college counselors have. Lou, you've been here for 30 years in the business?
Well, 25.
20.
I
I rounded up, okay. And then Britt, you've been 11 total. Joe, 20.
22.
They have so much experience within the 3 of them that you're in such great hands. So please keep that in mind too. The lady at the deli, the one beside you on the airplane, they're not the true experts. So please remember to trust the experts and also to ask questions, which is what I want to get to now. So does anyone have any general questions about the college process? Yep, yes, sir.
So, recalling my own experience and others that I've heard of, it's not always clear at this stage of life what it is that you want to focus on and study.
Amen.
So, some of that, I think is known, but I guess the question is, how important is it to try to figure that out, or how important is it to try to fake it?
Great question. How many of you, raise your hands, are in a field that was what you went to school for, specifically? Okay, so this is, raise your hand if you didn't. That's more hands. Exactly. So your question is, there's 2 parts to your question. The first is, I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but I don't know what I'm going to be when I grow up. And so I think that that's part of going to college is just to refine your skill set, to figure out what you think you want to do. You're not going to get out of college and have your set career. Now, some of you in the room did, and that's great, but that doesn't happen for everyone. I think the real piece of going to college is to figure out a better idea of what you want to do. Now, I work at a liberal arts school, so obviously this is my plug. For liberal arts schools are great places for people that are not sure what they want to do. However, there's also large research institutions where students can go and take great classes to try to figure it out. It's really about helping your student decide and limit, well, I think I want to do this, but I know this is just as important, I don't want to do these things, and helping them kind of navigate that. They're not going to know after 1 semester when they get to college, this is what I'm going to be when I grow up. And I think that the sooner you help yourself and your students realize that, the better it will be to have that conversation. Why are you going to college? What are they going to college for? And a lot of times it's to figure out if this is what I want to do. So my younger brother is a great example. He thought he wanted to do engineering. He got to his large research institution and had a total 180 and decided he wanted to be a doctor. So he's currently in med school. Did the path take longer? Yes. Is he on the right track now? Absolutely. And so I think keeping that in mind too is really important. The faking it part will bite you, and I think that it's not fair for anyone involved to try to fake it, because at the end of the day, that's just giving everyone involved kind of false hope as far as helping them lead them to figuring out what it is. When they get to college, every college has great career service centers. There's going to be professors they can talk with and advisors to help them through the process. And so I think faking it isn't necessarily helping the student figure that out any better than if they knew what they wanted to do. Yes, sir.
A couple of quick questions. How many applicants do you get on an annual basis at Franklin Marshall?
7,100 we had last year.
Okay, so that's roughly 1,100 hours of review.
Yes, thank you.
Well,
I have no life, yes.
that's, what triggers are there? I mean, you have 7,100 and that, compared to some of the bigger schools,
Right.
Which might be 4 or 5 times that. What triggers are there that you put an application on this file versus that file?
Great question. And so keep that in mind. When you're thinking about the places that your students are applying to, think about how many average apps do they get. Some schools that get 50,000 applications. There's no way that there's 2 people like me that can spend 12 to 17 minutes on each app, because that's just not humanly possible. So think about how many applications the schools that they're applying to receive to help figure out how much time they'll spend actually looking at their applications. At Franklin and Marshall, it's a very holistic process. So like I said, we're looking at the whole picture of the student. GPA, strength of schedule. Have they challenged themselves in their curriculum? We look at their grades and their GPA. We look at their class rank if it's available. Test scores. We're also a test optional place. So if a student doesn't think their test scores really reflect who they are as a student, we allow them to submit 2 graded writing samples from something that they've already submitted here at Blair. We'll take those rather than their test scores. We also read 2 teacher letters of recommendation. There's not 1 or 2 things that stand out, because we're looking at all of these pieces and putting all the puzzle pieces together to get to the end result of, will this student be successful at Franklin and Marshall, and do we want them as a member of our community? Those are the 2 things we're looking for, and it comes across in many different ways. So we're not just looking for a quarterback. We're not just looking for a new trombonist for our jazz band. We're looking for so many different things that it's not as easy as saying, these are the 3 things I'm looking for. A lot of times I get really, really boring letters, teachers' recommendation letters, and they say disciplined, and they'll say hardworking. And I think that teachers think that that's going to be my trigger, that I'm going to say, oh, admit, this kid's hardworking, done, no other questions. It's not as easy as looking for just a few things, it's really the whole puzzle piece. The larger schools oftentimes will rely heavily on GPA and test scores, more so than a place like Franklin and Marshall, just because of the total number of applications. That's not the only thing that they look at, but they have to rely more on those data points than others.
And from a college perspective, how confusing is the 6-point scale versus the 4-point scale?
Not confusing at all. There are places that are far worse. There are some places that don't provide grades. Can you imagine? And they're like, I'm trying to think of what they call them, but they're basically just like dialogues about this student in my class, and there's no grade. And so that is by far the worst. The 6.0 scale, that's a breeze, no problem. Yes?
How important then at your school and then other even bigger schools is the interview?
Great question. So not everyone has interviews. Not everyone offers interviews. I always recommend if a school offers an interview, then do it. The only caveat is unless your student will be paralyzed with fear and anxiety and not able to do a good interview, then that would be the one case that I would say don't do the interview. The interview is a fantastic opportunity for your student to reveal their personality firsthand. And so it's a really great chance for us to get to know who they are that's not just pen and paper and black and white. The other thing is too, though, is make sure that your student actually wants to interview. Again, seems easy. However, I have had a few students now purposefully sabotage the interview with me because mom and dad wanted them to do the interview. They don't want to come to F&M, but they also don't want to have that conversation, so they end up wasting my time and theirs by totally sabotaging the interview.
How about visiting? Is that
Visiting.
important?
So every school, and I feel like a broken record, every school is different with visiting. The smaller the school, typically the more they rely on demonstrated interest. So visiting can be one of those characteristics. A lot of schools also, it'll depend on how you go about signing up for a visit. You can kind of tell. If you have to fill out a form before you visit, if you walk in and they have you fill out forms, that's going to be one indicator that they're probably counting your interest level. Whereas larger schools, if you walk in and they're like, hey, how's it going? Tour's leaving now. They probably have no idea or don't necessarily care that you're there because they get that many applications that the visit might not be a big deal. If your student's looking at schools that aren't close by and they feel like they want to tell someone, I'm so sorry I can't come to UCLA, but I really am interested, or wherever it might be, it's really easy to find out who their rep is and reach out and just tell them and express their interest that way. Visiting, I think, is the biggest thing that you can do for your student to see if it does feel like the right place. And I always suggest for all families and parents, and this is, my visit team will hate me for saying this, but always go off-road. So I'm the visit coordinator for Franklin and Marshall, and so I strategically plan our information sessions, our tours, where you go, what you see, what you do. We have students that do lunch visits. That's all very much strategized on our part. The best thing that you can do is blow that off, do those things, but then go off-road and sit in the dining hall and listen to students have conversations. Wander around the library and see how students are. Pretend to be lost, and students will come over to you and say, hey, can you help me get to wherever you're going? Get a better feel for what the campus life is like that's not the one that I've perfectly produced for you. Don't tell anyone I said that. Yes?
Pretend that none of the Blair staff is here.
Okay.
What is it about the Blair kids that you've recognized over the last couple of years at F&M and the quality of the kids coming out here?
I think the level of independence and drive and motivation, not for the grade though, that's a big thing. At Blair, the students that we see have done such amazing work in the classroom and they're so excited about the next step, but it's not, and this is the grade that I got. That grade is an afterthought for them, and that really impresses our committee because they're after it for the actual learning, the intention of learning, and not, I got to get an A. That to them, you have to almost pry it out of them to figure out what their GPA is when I interview the students here. And I think that that's something that's really, really special. Also, the amount of leadership opportunities that they have. F&M is not all leaders, because if we were made up of all leaders, it would be a nightmare. But just the quiet sense of leadership and independence that the students have, and having that stake in their own education is also really impressive. Over the last 8 years, I've had various territories, I've had almost all the territories, and thinking about some of the larger New England boarding schools, thinking that that would be what I would assume going in, having these, you certainly have notions about certain schools before you get there, and that was something that I expected to see at large New England boarding schools, was just that sense of loving the learning, and when I came to Blair, it was just palpable, the feeling of they really want to learn. The questions Blair students ask me, also amazing. They're not asking me, what's there to do for fun? They want to know, when can I start research? I'm like, okay, sure, no problem. Yes?
What are the advantages, if any, of early decision?
Great question. Every school is different with early decision. Some schools have early decision, which is binding. Other places have early action that's not binding. With every school, it's different as far as what percentage of their class they take early versus regular. So at Franklin and Marshall, we take half of our class through early decision 1 and 2. So there's definitely a priority for students that are choosing us early decision than those that wait till regular. So half of our class already being filled. We're looking for 610 first-year students already filled through ED1 and ED2. So our regular decision admit rate drops drastically because we've already sealed out half of the class through ED1 and ED2. Other schools are the opposite. Some schools don't take as many. It's really case by case and year to year. So again, that's where you can lean on your college counseling office to figure out what's best for your student, if early decision is the way to go or not. Early decision is for students who eat, sleep, drink, breathe. They know they want to go to F&M, and they've always known they wanted to go to F&M. It's not for the student that's, well, I really like F&M and I really like Dickinson. Maybe I'll just apply to one. It's not for the student that doesn't know. They need to know in their heart and soul that that's the place that I want to go. That's for early decision students. Yes, ma'am.
I have two questions. One is, how do college admissions officers look at transfer students, high school transfer, and then also, can you talk a little bit about student athletes and how that?
Sure, absolutely. So transfer students, there's a really great section on the application where they ask to explain if you change schools, and that's your student's opportunity to really explain why they might have transferred. We get things from, we moved to a different state, to I got this awesome opportunity. That's the moment for your student to really explain the reason behind the transfer. A lot of times students don't take advantage of that, and so we're left questioning and wondering, and that's the biggest mistake students can do, is make me have to be a detective to figure out why did they transfer. Because my mind automatically goes to lifetime movie status, and I think the worst. Let us know exactly what happens in that moment. We don't necessarily care why they transfer. It doesn't really matter to us. That's the student's journey. We just want to have the information up front so we know and understand why the need for the transfer. For student athletes, Division I versus Division II, Division III, all very different. And again, your college counselors can help you with that. I think my biggest piece of advice for athletes is make sure that your students will be happy no matter where they go, with or without the athletic piece. So if, heaven forbid, they break their wrist and they can't throw a football anymore, will they be miserable at F&M, or will they still be a thriving, engaged student in our school? I think that's the biggest thing for student athletes. Also, there have been studies done that student athletes typically have better GPAs when they're in season because of the time management piece. And so helping your students now really work on their time management with their athletics can really help set them up for better success when they do get to college. Yes, ma'am.
How do you view the desire to have a gap year? And any advice on what you would hope or deter a child from?
Yeah. So gap years have become more and more popular over the years, and so gap years, we think they're totally fine as long as they provide us with enough kind of details as what they plan on doing and why they plan on doing it. And so sometimes it can be, I just want to take a year to collect my thoughts, to figure out what I'm doing, to save money, from other things such as I want to travel the world. I mean, there's so many different instances out there. We're really not looking for one type of gap year over the other, as long as the student just explains what they're after in that gap year. There's also a lot of schools sometimes will have actual programs built in. So at Franklin and Marshall, we actually have a spring admit program where we allow students the fall semester to do kind of a mini gap year, to go abroad, get credits elsewhere, and then come to our campus in January. So a lot of schools already have options like that. It's just a matter of figuring out if your student really wants to take the full gap year or if they're interested in doing something different like that. Great question. Yes?
How do you tell when you've made a mistake and that the kid is not a good fit at the school, or things are not going well?
Great question. It shouldn't be week 2, first semester. A lot of times I reach out to my students that are on campus that are from my territory, and I'll just say, how things are going, what's the biggest thing that you're surprised about, what are you missing most about your school? And the first semester is hard, but it's supposed to be. It's a big transition going from, whether it be a place like Blair or a public high school, living at home, not living at home, it's a big transition being on their own all the time. And so I think that it's really a matter of making sure that they get through that first semester to make sure that it's really not the place for them. Academically, I think that's another piece too. Typically, the first semester is the hardest for students just because of not knowing the expectations and kind of figuring out what that adjustment is from, a place like Blair sets your students up so they'll be able to, seamlessly transition academically. But if your student is somewhere where they're clearly over their head, then I think that conversation should be had. And I think that, again, it should be up to your students to advocate for themselves, talk to professors at their campus, talk to their advisor, and make sure that it does seem like maybe this isn't the best place for them. But again, don't pull the trigger on that too quickly. Yes?
Can I just follow up to the first question that was asked regarding the application process? Just pragmatic advice, maybe for, so you have a son who, 17-year-old, they don't always know what they want to do. But if they have some threads that they can create a narrative on.
Yep.
If it was your kid, would you say, create the narrative, create that thread? Or would you say, nah, if you're mostly undecided, that's kind of how you should express yourself?
I think that it really depends on where they see if it's an interest or if it's a career choice. So I'm super into baseball. Baseball is my thing. I grew up thinking I wanted to be on ESPN. I still do, but here I am. And so I think the big difference is it an interest? And so everyone loves AP psychology. That seems to be like the favorite class of everyone. And so we see a lot of students at F&M say, I want to be a psych major. We don't let students declare a major till their sophomore year on purpose because we want them to have time to decide. And a a lot of times students figure out in college, oh, I just like AP Psych, I don't want to do anything with it. So I think that that's kind of the piece. These threads, are they interests or are they long-term, this will lead me to a career? Easy for me to say I was an English major, so I may be the worst because my mom and dad were on a daily basis. So what do you do with an English major? And I think that that also can be part of it. There's two sides to that coin. If your student does have a strong interest in an area that they think, I think this could lead to a career, then let them have that. And remember that when they get to college, they're not on an island. They don't have to figure it out on their own. There are so many people that help them when they get to college figure out what can come from that different area of interest. And depending on the school, will depend on how soon they make them declare that major. Some places you have to apply to get into that major, and they're kind of on a one-track set. That's it. That's what you're going to do. And so I think that the fear is that they make that commitment, and then they decide this might not feel right. And so figuring out what the next steps are, that does happen at each different school. Yes?
I've heard you really talk a lot about authenticity. So how do you differentiate when you do these applications between ones that are prepared by people on a
Oh, yeah. You can totally tell. Totally tell. A lot of times, it's just looking across all different forms of communication. So I get a lot of emails, hey, Ms. Jacobson. And then I get the essays where they're just the most beautifully written and the most nicely crafted essay. And I think this is not, hey, Ms. Jacobson. There's no way that this is the same student. Even looking at supplements. So at F&M, we have 2 optional supplements. The essay looks one way and reads one way with just the most beautiful, thesaurously used adjectives. And then I get to the supplements. Why F&M? Because it's a great hip city. Probably not the same author. It's the same thing like if you took a book that you're reading for fun and I took a kid's book and put that in the different pages, you just can feel like this just doesn't seem like the kid I was just reading 2 pages ago. And especially when you have thousands of them to read, they really stand out much more than others. The thing I will also say, that another piece of advice, is don't try to over-edit your students' essays because your voice is not their voice. And so if you think, let me just take a look at your essay, let me just make a few edits, your voice starts to crowd over theirs, and theirs gets lost in the shuffle. And theirs is who we want to see, because they're going to be in our classrooms, they're in our dorm rooms. Your name will not be on the diploma. I saw a question. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. In other schools for their supplements have the diversity question. And I was just curious because I know I student last year in another school, she was trying to figure out what are colleges really looking for in terms of the answer for a
Right.
diversity question.
Right.
Because it can go so many different ways. Are they looking for an anecdote? Are they looking? What is their thought behind? What do they need to read?
And so that is the Jedi mind trick that we're playing on them. We're not looking for one thing in particular. We just want you to answer it. And a lot of times our questions are left ambiguous on purpose because we just want to see what they'll do with it. If it was a black and white easy answer, then it would be that. We would phrase it as such. University of Chicago is well known for having the most wild supplement questions. One year it was define X. So clearly they're given no other guidance. And so your students are just asked to kind of run with it. And so we're not looking for one thing or another. It's just how your student decides to answer will tell us who your student is. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for that voice. Even our YF&M question, I see so many different types of answers to that. It's not as standard as just, I like F&M because X, Y, and Z. Sometimes students do poems. Sometimes they do a million different things. And I'm not looking for one thing or another. I just want to know, at the end of the question, why are you applying to F&M? Yes?
For schools that interview, are there any sort of tells or indications that they're actually interested in your student or in the student after the interview?
You mean from our side?
Yeah.
So it really depends on who's doing the interviewing. Alumni interviews, student interviews, even people that necessarily might work in our offices, a lot of times they're just asked to interview the student, get a sense of their personality, how they potentially would fit in our campus, and then to supply us with that information. It's not necessarily that they have the inside scoop on if they're going to be in or not. And a lot of times, again, that's just one piece of the puzzle. Having a really strong interview is not going to be your ticket to admission. Having a really terrible interview also is not going to be the reason that you might not get in. It's just one piece of a larger puzzle. I don't think that there's any tells necessarily, just because a lot of times places are just, it's another way to gather information, so it's a little more of a piece to a bigger whole. Yes?
So you mentioned alumni.
Yes?
So that's just a former graduate who comes to assist the admissions office. So
provided by the college in terms of questions.
Exactly. And it depends on the school. It depends on the school what they offer. So sometimes that's the only thing that they offer are alumni interviews. Sometimes they won't even offer alumni interviews. It really depends on the school. But whatever they have, if you're able to do it, then I would definitely recommend doing it.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
This morning, we have 2 Brown alums interviewing all of our regular decision students for Brown. And so they do come here, which is great. But the one thing I wanted to tell you is that pretty much without exception, these alumni often tell me, I just sent a note to Chris the other day, our Princeton alumni interview just said, your kids are awesome. Now that doesn't really mean much in the application process at Princeton because it's so uber selective, but because our kids are interacting with adults on so many different levels, you know, either on the playing fields, in the dormitories, dining hall, whatever, all these different interactions make them much more comfortable with adults anyway. So when they interview, they tend to do really well. And what we try never to do is mess them up by telling them anything about what they should say. Because our kids, when left alone, do beautifully. And I'm very proud of that. I wish you could be there to hear what these people say when they get done working with our kids. I just want you to know that, because that's a real value added to this experience here. Sometimes people don't understand until they're a little bit older.
And again, another thing that you can tell when a student's being genuine in the interview. I had interviews 2 weekends ago, and one student kept saying, well, I should say, whatever the answer. And I was like, don't should say, just say whatever it is you want to say. And then they answered a question. I had a question where I said, you know, if there was one book on your nightstand for the rest of your life, what would that book be? And he blurted out an answer, and it wasn't necessarily the most academic book. It was fine. I didn't really care. It was just a question. And then 10 minutes later, he was like, can I go back to the book question? I shouldn't have said that. Can you change my answer because you're on the right? And I was like, absolutely not. Your first answer was perfectly fine. And so again, the authenticity of your student does come through in the interview. And so I think, just like Lou said, messing with that really changes the dynamic of who they are. Yes?
How about the college fairs when you're here and kids come by? What is the purpose to get a flavor of kids coming in, or is it really just to represent your school, or is it a little bit of both?
It's a little bit of both. So college fairs are kind of like the first kind of shopping around. So we can provide you information, we can give you literature to read. Hopefully later you'll read the information you take. But it's also just to answer general questions. Coming up to me at a college fair and asking me about our history program because we're located on the battlegrounds of Gettysburg will signal to me that you don't know anything about Franklin and Marshall and where we are. And so this is really the opportunity to collect more accurate information, but not necessarily the place to try to see what you already know. And it's also, we're not really making a lot of connections. Sometimes students will introduce themselves and that's great, but I also meet 50 other students, so I'm not necessarily going to remember that student from anything other than just a short interaction. It's not an interview. A lot of times students think that that's their moment to really let me get to know them. And honestly, it's just more of an exchange of information. Let me get your mailing address, we can add you to our list, here's my information, keep in touch. Yes?
Promise, last question.
No, that's fine.
8 years now you've been at Franklin and Marshall.
Yes, sir.
Biggest change you've seen in the admission process, and also biggest change you've seen on campus, and college campuses in general?
So the biggest change I've seen in the admission process is, they're kind of similar, is that we read electronically now. So my first few years we had to lug around files, paper files, and I had paper cuts all over my fingers because of reading paper. Also leads to the same thing with the on campuses, it's just social media and how social media has impacted the application process and just college campuses. I think a lot of times, I think all the time, students are posting just their best selves on social media, and so students see so-and-so that's a first-year student somewhere, and they look like they're having a great time at Penn State. They're posting all these fabulous pictures all the time. They're having such a great experience. But that student's not posting that they're in the library until midnight every night, and they're not posting when they got a D on their first paper, or whatever the case may be. And I think a lot of times students, all of us, fall into the trap of thinking that social media is a true reflection of our life all the time, and it's really not. And so sometimes students will come to F&M and they'll say, your students seem so happy. And they do, but you also have to realize that it's definitely, there's going to be peaks and valleys when it comes to that. And so I think social media, also not knowing the source of information, can be a trap too. There's places online like College Confidential and other ones where there's just random posts about what our college is and isn't, and there's no factual information tied to who is even posting it. And so I think that social media has definitely begun to impact more of what we do on a regular basis. And just the level of information that we can't control. And it's not a matter of we want to, micromanage the information, it's just keeping it to be the most correct information that we can. Yes?
Following up on the social media side, how in-depth do you get with looking at your students' social media?
Great question.
Facebook, posts,
So,
that sort of
I'm the detective in my office. I love looking at social media accounts of students. And my favorite example I will share was a few years ago, I had an ED student who the application just didn't seem right. And I just kept thinking there's more to this student. I just don't think that they really, I don't know, something was off. So I decided late at night, I'm just gonna check Facebook, check Twitter, check Instagram, see what I can find. And every profile picture, her face was painted blue and orange, which is Gettysburg's colors. It was all about Gettysburg. And I kept thinking, well, maybe this is a coincidence. And then the deeper and deeper I looked, the more I realized this student had applied to both of our schools' early decision, which is not allowed. And so it ended up being this whole thing about, taking advantage of the contract and the agreement. And so we, at F&M, we don't spend a ton of time, but it is out there. And so we are able to access it. If it's out there, then we're able to use it in part of our committee process.
A few years back, we had a young man admitted to Colorado College, early decision, and he posted something to the effect like, now I just so tired of working so hard, I'm coasting out. And the dean of admission, who's a friend of mine, called me up like the next day. He said, hey, you better tell, what's his name, that he better not do that, because if he tanks in the spring of his year, we're going to pull his acceptance. I said, I'll make sure I pass that on. So it happens. I'm sure other people are looking too.
Any other, yes?
After acceptance of a student, do colleges do anything further to attract someone to come to that school?
Yes, that is the month of April in our lives. So we typically send out decisions the middle to end of March, and then students have until May 1. That is the day that they have to decide. And so the entire month of April becomes this game. And so thinking about the college process, it is kind of like a really weird dating game, because in the fall, your students are trying to attract me, the colleges. And they're like, you should like me, you should really like me. And we're also like, yeah, I might like you too, come check us out. Then they apply. And then they're all about, it's their game then. They're like, look at how cool I am, you should pick me, I want to come. Meanwhile, I play hard to get. I'm like, maybe, I have 7,000 other students, let me see what I got. Then we pick them, and then we are all like, please, come to F&M, come to F&M. And so the power dynamic is constantly shifting, and so what we do is we try to get students to deposit, within that month frame, but they also have all their other acceptances that they have to weigh. And so that becomes kind of the full court press of, this is why you should pick my school, here are the reasons why. Every school has admitted student days where we bring you back to campus to show you this could be your life if you pick us, and to meet other students and things like that. So that's typically literally the month of April. Yes?
So you clearly have to admit more students than you have spots for.
Absolutely.
So what happens if students accept above your...
You mean last fall? What happened last fall? Exactly what happened. More students picked us than we anticipated. And so we were sitting at about 2,300 students, and we ended up at 2,400 at F&M. Thankfully, we had room for everyone, but what happens at some places that don't have the ability is sometimes then they'll send out kind of 911 emails. Anybody looking to do a gap year this year? Perfect opportunity to do a gap year. And so they have to find spots. It might not be the best living conditions. They might have, 4 people in a double. They might ask you to have to live off campus. Every college kind of handles that situation differently, but we really try really hard to not over-enroll.
But there's no rescinding of acceptance.
Not unless you tank senior year, you do something really terrible, then that's when we would rescind, yeah. It's not their fault that we didn't anticipate that many people coming. Yes?
Are colleges as focused on the yield as boarding schools are?
The yielding piece is so hard to predict that we really can't focus on that. We really just put our acceptances out there and kind of see what happens. That's why we take so many in early decision though, is so that we can firm up at least half of our class through ED1 and ED2, because we know that they're kind of sure things, that they sign the contract, and then we have less to worry about yielding for the second half.
And do you or most colleges publish that yield rate or not?
You know, it changes every year so drastically, and there's no rhyme or reason. So most of them don't, but most of them are probably pretty low anyway, just because who knows what the other choices were. There's so many factors that go into it. Yes?
Follow up to that, do you ever not accept a student who you think you would because you think they won't come and it'll impact your yield?
So at Franklin and Marshall, I wouldn't take a kid that I don't think wouldn't come if they haven't shown any interest. Then yes.
Okay.
So a student that I think would be great, but they have not,
Showed up.
yeah. They haven't put a shadow on my doorstep, not an email, no communication, didn't answer our YF&M question. If they show no interest in me, then I worry, why would they accept me? And that's when I can have conversations and say, I got this guy Joe who applied, never heard of him. Is he really interested or not? Like, what's... That happens far fewer than you might think, though. Yes?
Following up on that, the child has expressed interest.
Yes.
You're looking at, I'm thinking of numbers, I don't know. Your high SAT score is 1,200, this kid is a 1,400, and you look and you say, she's been here, I don't know if she's going to come. Will that make you pass on the student? And do you know where that student has applied to other schools?
No, but I wish I did. So if a student is academically successful and would do great things at F&M and they have shown interest, then we're going to admit them. We can't play that game of, are they going to come? Sometimes we'll get students that are far superior academically than our admitted profile, and we think, if only we knew where they applied. Did they apply, you know, are they going to get into the places they applied to or not? We still want to take that student because we still, A, want to be on their list, because how great if that student has 1,500 straight A's and is valedictorian. We want them to say, well, where did you get in? We want to be on that list. We want to hear, Franklin and Marshall took me too. So we're not playing the game of, if you're not going to come here because they're above profile. We still accept that student for sure.
And this is where waitlisting weighs in, you have a gap in there.
And that's kind of our parachute for college admission, is the wait list. The wait list, we're able to have students in a holding pattern, see who deposits May 1, and then go from there if we have to go to the wait list, and deciding from there if we do need to have more students on our campus or if we're set with the number we have. Yes?
Can you talk about your interaction with college counselors, parents, outside advisors?
Yeah.
How much interaction is there in the process, or should there be?
Great question. So the number one person I should speak with is the student. Then number two would be, I'd say, the college counselors, and then three would be parents. There's a lot of times students will try to, or not students, but people will try to advocate on a student's behalf, and they're consultants, they're outside counselors, and they just muddy the water because of the relationships we have are with the professionals, the experts that we know at the school that your students go to. Sometimes with parents, again, it goes back to the whole we thing. I think financial aid has much more interaction with parents than we do on the admission side. I'm happy to answer questions that parents have, but I think that a lot of times it needs to be the student, again, in the driver's seat asking those questions. College counselors, that is really, my job is basically the relationships. So it's visiting schools for 8 weeks in the fall. When I visit a school, I expect to talk to a college counselor at that school so I can get to know them, they can get to know me. Places like Blair that have the 6.0 scale, it's like I know those schools off the top of my head. I know that Princeton Day School, their history and English classes, junior and senior year, are both honors level, even though they're not on the transcript as that. Like that sort of thing just sticks in my brain because I've had those schools for so long, and the relationships I've made with those college counseling officers. I also have students where if I see something funny on a transcript and I don't know what's going on, again, I'll pick up the phone and say, can you explain, this student withdrew from this class, or this counselor hinted to a medical condition, is there anything, getting more information and having the relationships I have with college counselors makes my job all much more easier that I can have that and not wonder and worry what might be, the real reason behind it. Yes?
So after the deadline of having to say, you want to definitely come say that to F&M.
Yep.
But that's your second choice and you're waitlisted on your first choice, and then after May 1st, you get your acceptance to where you were waitlisted. Like, how does that work? Are you able to say, sorry, F&M, I got my first choice, that I was waitlisted, and get out of that?
Exactly. So you typically lose your deposit then. So if you deposit at F&M, you give us the enrollment fee, and then then maybe July, someone else comes calling and says, hey, we got a spot for you. If you decide to go for that choice, that's fine. Then you just have to tell us, and then we'll probably keep your enrollment fee, and then you'll go to the other place. Make sure that you have a home, and they'll tell you this. Make sure you have a home by May 1. Your student has to have a home, at least deposited somewhere, so that they have a place, because playing the waitlist game is not the best. I always think the waitlist game should be a fun surprise. Don't bank on it. So if they do call, great, let's talk about it, but don't put your eggs in that. Don't put all your eggs in that basket. Yes?
The teacher references, we haven't implemented teachers about this, unless you do directly about it.
Exactly. So we require 2 teacher recommendation letters, and they're really important because they're the people that see the students in the classroom setting. And so we require 2 of them because of that. We like to hear from 2 different teachers. And again, it's just more information about who your student is in the classroom setting and what they would bring to our college campus community.
Should those reference letters be customized for each college or
No.
one generic reference?
One, and at Blair, they're never generic. At Blair, they have really, really strong letters of recommendation because they're not just a form letter. It's much more about anecdotes about this time the student did this. One of my biggest things that I tell teachers is, don't tell me the adjectives that you would use to describe the student, tell me the story so that I can find the adjectives to describe them myself. And Blair letters of recommendation are really, really great. They're very strong. Yes?
If you're waitlisted,
Yes.
what is the approach that you suggest for students to take?
What's the approach?
Right, after you say at the end of in March, you're still waitlisted.
Right. So we typically say for places like F&M, 1 email just to kind of re-up interest. Just, I found out I was waitlisted. I'm still interested. Please keep me on the list. That's all you need to do. You don't have to email me every day asking if there's a spot. We'll contact the students on an individual basis if there's a spot open and when we know who we'd like to offer that spot to. But it's a waiting game. And it could be May 2nd. It could be June 13th. It could be August 1. I mean, really, there's so much time that it could be here for the weekend.
We have time for one more, I think.
Oh, gosh. Yes.
So for a student who knows they want to do a gap year, can they still apply ED and defer?
So every school is different on that. At F&M, they can. What we have to do is we have to approve what they're going to do for their gap year.
Okay.
And so oftentimes students will want to apply ED then because they're still kind of figuring that out. Because it's a long time for them to figure out all the specifics before they come to campus.
Even if they're doing like the spring admit, which
So
some
the spring
schools
admit is
offer?
something that we can talk with individually. They can request that through ED though if they're interested.
Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate great questions. Let's thank Kate for coming out, and she'll be around a little bit. We're going to take 10 minutes now or so to get some coffee, come back, and we're going to have Evan Wessler from Method Test Prep to explain to you that our test prep option, which by the way is free and really good, so that you understand what's available to your son or daughter. Thank you very much. As you know, standardized testing is an important part of this process, and we are fortunate to have Evan Wessler here, who is the Vice President of Method Test Prep, which is an online service that we provide to all of our students. We don't let the freshmen on, but sophomores and juniors and the seniors. And I'm really, really happy to say that the program is working really well. We're proud of it. There's a million different ways to go about test prep, but I think this is a good option for kids. It's not the only option, but it's a really good one for our kids. And those, as you'll find out, it's pretty manageable. One of the toughest things about being in a boarding school is there isn't really any time. We used to have this guy who came here who was really good, but the only time he could come was Sunday morning at 9 o'clock. And so the poor kids had to get up. The only day they could sleep, they had to get up, trudge over to the science building and sit down for 4 hours at a time. And it was a pain. It's a bit of a pain. But this program, I think, works much better. So Evan's going to talk to you about what your son or daughter will have available and why it might be a good idea. Thank you. Go ahead, Evan.
All right, good morning, everyone. Glad you're all here this morning and going to be talking about our program, Method Test Prep, what it is, how students can use it. Just by show of hands, how many folks in here are already familiar with Method Test Prep or have at least heard of it, know sort of what it is? Okay, good. So a lot of hands. And in about 10 minutes, we'll be administering a mock section of a real SAT to see how, I'm just joking. I wait for the fear to set in for just a half second. So I'm going to be talking about the SAT and the ACT, just a couple of differences. Happy to take questions. Won't take up too much of your time, but as you guys know, SAT and ACT, they're very important in admissions, and they often seem like a bigger hurdle than they ought to be. So, what is Method Test Prep? Well, it's a comprehensive ACT and SAT prep program. And what we've tried to do is design a program with students in mind, where we know that as adults, we look at tests differently. We have a lot of experience with reading. You know, we've been through the mill time and again, but it's different for students who have to prepare for standardized tests. It's a different animal, and it's the first time they're dealing with a test, in most cases, that's quite like the SAT or the ACT. It's significantly different from what they see in school. It's available from any internet-connected device. You can log on via your phone, a tablet, any sort of laptop computer, desktop, what have you. We have mobile optimized versions of the website that automatically adjust the windows and everything, so it's a good user experience regardless of the device, so there are no excuses. The program is full of lessons, quizzes, evaluations, and a couple of features which I actually talked to your students about last night that even though a lot of them have done extensive work in the program, they didn't really know about. They weren't aware of some of these things. Progress and skills tracking is a really important part of the program. Part of prep, of course, is not just reviewing stuff and doing practice problems, but being aware of what you know and what you don't know, because that's the only way you can actually focus and improve. And we have very robust tracking features built into the program. One of them is called the Concept Summary Report. And what that does is once students start working through, it starts building a growing list of performance. How does my student do compared to every other student who uses the program across the nation? We've got about 1,000 schools using Method Test Prep with their students across the country and some even overseas. The average score increases up here, not specific to Blair, these are just across the board. And these are for students who use nothing but our program. When we have students complete the program, they do the diligent work, they see an average of 120-point increase on the SAT and a 3-point increase on the ACT. Of course, they're on different scales. The SAT is on a scale of 1600 and the ACT on a scale of 36. So that's why there's that difference there. When students use nothing but the program. Now, of course, students can do a variety of other things. They can take full-length practice exams. They can work with tutors outside. You may have your students doing other things, but we know the program works. Of course, the hurdle is just using it. And that's why I met with your students last night. We do a couple of things to help promote usage of the program. And I'm happy to say that usage this year has grown spectacularly. It's grown each year that Blair has purchased the program for all of your students, but this year it was just a major jump, and I'll show you those numbers shortly. Here they are. So last year, from the start of school to about this time, some of you, I don't know if you were here last year, you may have seen me, there were 400 total student logins. And this year, up to this point, the same time period, 560. And during this time, again, last year to this time, there were 2,700 questions answered. This year, almost 14,000. And that is a huge jump and something we're very proud of. So kudos to your students for doing the job. They're actually getting on the program and using it, which is a great piece of news. This is a massive jump. We have, as I said, around 1,000 schools across the country. We see this sort of jump extremely rarely, and it's a testament to the fact that students are actually taking it very seriously. Even the cumulative time they spent. Again, last year, up until this time, 24 hours cumulative time on the program, combining the time every student spent. This year, it's 144 hours, okay? That is a massive, massive jump. And it reflects the fact that students are taking it seriously, taking advantage of the resources we have to offer. If you don't know whether your child is signed up for Method Test Prep, you may want to take a picture of this slide. The slide is also available, I believe, on Blair Academy website, but it's extremely easy to establish an account. We're making the barrier to entry, so to speak, very, very low. So the students really have no excuses for getting started or for not getting started. They go to this link, they click sign up, they enter some basic information, pick a username and password, they enter the token code, just so we know they're Blair students and not some random person taking advantage of the Blair sign up, and then they sign up, and that's it. And the program presents itself as extremely intuitive to use. So it's based on a checklist of tasks. What we know is that there are a lot of, test prep, as we say, is a very congested space. We've got a lot of folks who have programs and they tout the benefits and you can go a million different ways, but not very many programs are designed to be simple to use and very practical. We know for a fact that students are not going to sit and do test prep for 2 or 3 hours on end in front of a screen, especially in front of a screen. There are distractions, there are things going on, not to mention all the other work and activities they have. So we want to be extremely practical about how much time we expect students to work in a given work session. So most of the tasks are designed to be completed in 15 to 25 minutes. That's it. That's not a huge ask from students, but it is very valuable time spent because each of these lessons in the checklist leads to a very pointed quiz after the lesson, which is, you'll see a screenshot of a lesson. We've got engaging graphics, we've got audio, so if your students are really good auditory learners as opposed to the visual or reading style learners, they can actually listen to the lessons being spoken. We record, either I or one of my colleagues records the audio file, so they can listen along as they read or just listen. And then they take the quiz. So it's a very natural process, not a lot of clutter, there aren't flashy things all over the place. So it's extremely focused and centered on the task at hand. And each week they work through the program. This is just a suggested schedule of work. But students can hop around based on their preference. They don't need to limit themselves to the weekly schedule. They don't need to go in order. They're never locked out of a part of the program. So it's extremely flexible. If they want to focus only on math, so be it. If they want to focus on only advanced grammar stuff, so be it. They can use the program however they like. The lessons are not, it's not quite like reading a textbook. As I said, they're engaging, they've got audio files, they've got the practical information students need. And it's not just about information. One of if you remember nothing else from what I say today, and I hope all of you have had enough coffee to remember some more things, but if you remember nothing else, remember that the SAT and the ACT, it's not just about learning problem 19 on page 500 of your prep book. It's about learning a broadly applicable strategy that really joins a class of questions in a recognizable group. When students encounter a question on the SAT or ACT, it comes off as slightly different from things they've seen on a math test, on an English test before. And part of conquering this style of test is recognizing the root strategy that relates to that question. And once students are able to do that, then they start improving their scores. If they're just looking to solve individual problems and the end game is to just get correct answers, it's not as effective, anywhere near as effective as it can be. So our program is focused on strategy. And one of the ways we convey that strategy is through video explanations. Now, a lot of your students have been on the program. By show of hands last night, most of them have started using it, and that's also evident in the usage numbers this year. However, most of them were completely unaware that every single quiz question has a video explanation. And it's not like you have to take a quiz of 15 questions and wait to get feedback. Every single question has instant feedback. You go through the question, you get the correct or incorrect answer, depending on how you provide your answer, and then you scroll down and there's an opportunity for a video explanation. So you click the video explanation and it's either yours truly or one of my colleagues explaining not just that question, but again, the root strategy. I told the students last night that they may see a relatively simple looking problem, let's say just a basic geometry problem, and then they'll encounter the video explanation and it's like 5 minutes long. Well, I'm not taking 5 minutes to solve that one problem. What I'm doing is I'm showing the solution, showing the strategy, but then I might go into a couple of different questions that relate to that first question that they completed. That is the key. It's joining multiple questions that follow a common thread so that when they see a small twist in the future, they can recognize it as, hey, this is part of that class, I can use this strategy. That is the value of this program. So make sure, even if your students have used the program extensively, they know about the video explanations. There are many other features that I'm not going to get to go into detail today. As I said, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but there are two, just to let you know, a couple of other features, two full-length exams on both the SAT side and the ACT side. One of the things that makes our program unique is that we have two separate sides of the program, easily accessible by a single click. Near the top of the screen, there's a toggle between SAT and ACT. You go back and forth in 1 second. And you have two full-length tests at the end that you can take. We're constantly updating these. And any of you who have heard me speak before know that I and my colleagues still take the exams. I try to take one every year. Last time I took an ACT, I live in Pittsburgh. I went to Seton LaSalle Catholic High School, and I register and I go with the students, and it's really, really weird because I can't fit in the desk, and I know that I look not 17 anymore. And but you know, it's a fun experience. You probably think I'm a psycho, but I get a kick out of it. It's something that folks in the test prep field get a kick out of because we get to see the subtle changes in the test. It's not like we're taking pictures with our phone, but we use our prodigious memories to really absorb what the content is, notice slight changes, stay ahead of the curve, see what types of new questions they're incorporating or new styles of passages, and take advantage of that when we're building our program. This is where the content comes from. Of course, we can't copy questions straight out of their prep books because that's a copyright violation. The way we come up with our material is by becoming extremely familiar and well-versed in the real stuff. They release multiple tests a year to the public. We take advantage of those as well. So we know what the tests are testing, and we're constantly adjusting the program to reflect that. As a matter of fact, I just finished a complete revision of our SAT reading passages, which definitely have changed slightly from the beginning. You know, the SAT changed in March of 2016. There's a new version of the test that all of your students are taking right now. That change, the SAT, I think, got a little too aggressive at the start, made it a little too difficult, and maybe it's not noticeable to someone who's not super familiar with the exams or who hasn't seen a bunch of them, but we definitely have noticed slight differences between the first few SATs after that change and the more recent ones come out in 2017 and late 2016. And we adjust our program accordingly. So we really make sure that the material is as relevant and comprehensive as possible. There are also, as I said, concept summary reports. I showed all of your students that last night. They go to scores by concept near the top of their account. They see where their weaknesses are. It's extremely easy to tell. We have this icon system where any weakness they have is highlighted in red and any relative strength is highlighted in green. So it becomes very obvious where they need to put in more work. Quiz on demand. They can actually build custom quizzes by selecting topics in whatever area. Let's say they want to cover coordinate geometry, algebra, and trigonometry in math. They select those 3 topics from the list. The number of questions available pops up. They can say, okay, I want to do 10 questions. Click submit. They've got a 10-question quiz that incorporates questions from from those concepts. And by the way, one of our goals this year is to add 200 more questions. There are already thousands of questions. We're adding 200 more math questions in addition to doing some more minor revisions to the program. So we've got a lot of content in there. We've almost never had a student work completely through the program. A couple of stars every year, but there's really, you have to sort of try extremely hard to run out of material. And then there's a vocabulary builder. You know, vocabulary is not a huge component of either exam. If you remember your SAT, remember the sort of fill in the blank sentence completion questions or the antonyms and synonyms. They don't have those styles of questions anymore. It's more vocabulary and context, but it doesn't hurt to build your vocabulary. So if you've got the time, you can do that as well. So I walked your students through the program, so that's the deal with this. I'm not going to do that today. You can definitely explore on your own. If you have any questions, you can definitely email me. I'll put my email up at the end. I wanted to take just a couple minutes to discuss the differences between the SAT and the ACT before we wrap things up and take a couple of questions. questions. Just a myth that I want to make sure everyone is aware of. You know, the tests used to be very regional. Everyone was like, all right, ACT is the test of the Midwest. Maybe all of you took the SAT growing up and didn't even think about the ACT or vice versa. Not the case anymore. All colleges and universities will take either or without preference. There's no bonus point or no gold star for taking both and submitting both scores. It doesn't show that you're an extra high achiever. They're just going to use what's called a concordance table, compare the scores, and use the higher one in their admissions decision. They're more similar than ever, the SAT and ACT, but some important differences remain. Perhaps the most crucial difference is that the ACT is a much faster paced test. So if your student is a fast worker, has very quick processing and reasoning skills, quick reading comprehension, the ACT might be the test for more for her. Because the ACT questions, while they're very time limited, they're actually a lot more straightforward in most cases than SAT questions, which tend to be at a higher level, both reading comprehension and question comprehension, and tend to be a little bit more abstract. So different tests favor different types of students. And the best way to tell, there are a couple of other differences, different slight differences in the math. There's a no calculator section on the SAT that may not jive with your student's capabilities, or it may. There's a science section on the ACT, which is not really science so much as reading comprehension with charts and graphs. But the best way to tell is which test to take, which test favors your child, to have them take a full-length SAT, a full-length ACT, and figure it out. We ran a test for sophomores last year. Many of your students who were sophomores at the time probably took those exams and were able to make a decision accordingly. But if they want sort of more current scores, if they haven't yet taken an exam and are not sure which one to take, full-length exams, official exams are the way to go. So as promised, that's going to be it for me. As I said, if you have any questions, I regularly interact with Blair parents who have questions. I'm extremely happy to answer questions that you come up with after the fact, if you don't have any now. But does anyone have any questions at the moment? Yes?
When you look at all the amount of time kids have spent, what do you think the point is for the diminishing returns, time spent diminishing returns?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when a student spends, we have a sweet spot of prep time that we think students ought to put in to get the maximum amount of benefit. And for most students we work with, that is between somewhere between 20 to 24 hours, spread over as extended a time as you can make it. Maybe not like a year, but definitely multiple months, 3 or 4. Students can certainly jam in that amount of time in a couple of weeks, but it's not advisable. There have definitely been empirical studies that show that shorter sessions over a longer duration confer the most benefit. But sometimes, and it's different for every student. I mean, we've had plenty of students who seemed to plateau at 20 hours, 24 hours. They stepped away, they took a break, they came back, they were refreshed, and then all of a sudden things started clicking. There are many, many factors that contribute to where that point is for your student. I'll say that if you've gotten to a point where you've taken, let's say, 3 exams, which I say is probably the most you would want to take, and your score hasn't varied by more than, let's say, 40 points on the SAT or 1 or 2 points on the ACT, it's probably time to be comfortable with that score, unless there's something that you haven't been doing during that time that's noticeably disadvantageous, like learning strategy, for example. So that's the most accurate answer I can offer. Yes?
Does this help with the writing section?
Yes. Yep, so we actually have complete lessons for the essay component of both exams. So students can actually go to the English section on the ACT side or the writing language section of the SAT. They'll be presented with a mock prompt, a full explanation of what the task is, and a couple of strategy points, and then a sample essay that we pull from either tests one of us has taken and gotten a high score on, or a test that we write an essay for that's a sample, and we put it up there so students can see exactly the form that will help them.
When you hear someone say, I don't do well in standardized tests, how do you interpret that?
Yeah, there are a couple of factors one is definitely nerves and anxiety, and the other is lack of the right preparation a lot of the time. Again, not learning the strategy and not doing more than just being what one might call a passive test taker. There are a lot of strategies we use, especially for example, the English ACT section. You can actually learn to tell what the question is testing by comparing the answer choices of the question, and not even, I don't recommend not reading the passage, but if you are well-versed enough and if you are experienced enough, you've put in enough time and have learned the right things, you can hack the test, so to speak, in that way. If you're just taking questions, you're waiting for something to arise, you're waiting for some sort of epiphany, that's not quite the right approach. So a lot of the time students say, I'm not a good test taker. It's because they're still taking it passively. They're not looking for things that we know. It's not an if, it's a when they will show up. And they're not seeking those out on the test. So that's usually the major factor behind that. Yes.
Do you still have the ability for the SATs to consider the sections as you want? So you take it and then you choose your highest math score, or you choose your highest writing score, can you still do that?
So it's a really good question. The thing you're talking about is called score choice. It still exists. However, you cannot, I like to call it Frankenstein a report together. You can't take 2 or 3 exams and say, I want to take the math from the December exam and the English from the February exam and the reading from the April exam, self-assemble them into a single report and send that away to colleges who would be none the wiser. It doesn't quite work like that. If you want a certain score from a particular test date to be seen, all of the other scores of that test date go along with it. By default, the ACT will send only the test date scores that you specify. By default, the SAT will send everything, and unless you pick and choose and tell them. So there's slightly different systems, but you can't mix and match scores into a single report. There are many schools that will do what's called super scoring, which essentially constitutes them taking all the scores, and their system will automatically sort the scores and present only certain scores to the admissions committee. That's not something that you can do on your end.
We're in good shape. Thanks, Evan, for coming out and introducing the program to us. And we feel really good about the way it's set up, and the customer service we get from Evan is just first rate. So I'm very pleased with it, and I hope your son or daughter, if testing is something that they need to work on, it's a great way for them to get moving. And of course, it doesn't cost you, mortgage payment on your house. So anyway, thanks so much for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you.